Welcome to episode 21 of After the Breach, a podcast for whale enthusiasts. We are your hosts, professional whale watching captains and guides from the San Juan Islands in Washington State, Jeff Friedman and Sara Shimazu. We have a special episode today because we've taken the show on the road. While we normally record from Friday Harbor on San Juan Island, today we are in Bremer Bay, Western Australia, the other WA. We're spending the month of January with a special population of killer whales and are excited to share some information about them and stories from our encounters so far. This is actually Sarah's fourth visit to Bremer Bay, my second visit, and joining us on our podcast and her very first visit to Bremer Bay is April Ryan. April is a fellow captain and marine naturalist with us at Maya's Legacy Whale Watching. She also joined us on After the Breach in episode 8 to talk about the Minke Whale hunt. I'm very excited to talk about the Bremer Bay killer whales, so let's jump right in. Ahoy, Sarah. Ahoy, April.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Sarah.
So,
Hi, April.
so let's jump in, and before we start talking about the whales, let's talk about where we are. Where is Bremer Bay? There may be people that want to come see these whales, so I've mentioned this in the last episode, this great online tool to see where Bremer Bay is.
Oh, Lord, Jeff.
Google Maps, and we'll post a link. But Sarah, tell us where are we?
Well, we're in Bremer Bay, as you said. Bremer Bay is in Western Australia, and we're actually on the south coast of Western Australia. So if you look it up on a map, Bremer Bay is almost midway between Albany and Esperance, well, a little bit further west than midway. But yeah, on the south coast here in the state of Western Australia, and it's quite a ways from Perth. It's about a 6 to 8 hour drive, depending on how you drive.
Yeah, and so it's and Perth is not easy to get to. I mean, it's far. This is very remote. If you want to come see these whales, which it's worth it for sure, and we'll get into why. But this is a long way to come, and then Bremer Bay it's a very small town.
It's a small town, yeah.
Yeah, very small. I mean, it makes Friday Harbor seem big because Bremer Bay is only a few hundred people population-wise. And then the whales are not seen from shore, the whales that we're looking at.
Very different than what we're used to back home.
Yes. These are offshore whales that are seen far offshore, about 25 nautical miles offshore. Off the continental shelf, there is a canyon system where these killer whales are seen, like basically December through April.
Yeah, during the austral summer.
Yeah, and Sarah, you've spent you were here all last January, and you're here all of this January. You know quite a bit about these whales, so give us a little background about this population.
Yeah, I mean, I know a bit about these whales. Definitely am not the expert on them, but happy to share what I do know. So Bremer Canyon is part of a canyon system that, as Jeff, you mentioned, kind of lies on the continental shelf. So where the shelf drops off basically into the Southern Ocean. So we're going from, roughly like 250 meters of water, so about 600 feet deep, down into, I think the canyon itself drops down into like 3.5 kilometers deep. So,
deep.
over 4,000 feet, which for perspective, almost twice as deep as the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, this is some very deep water in these canyons.
Yeah, and it's not the only canyon out here. There's canyons kind of along the continental shelf where this deep water is coming up into or onto the shelf and kind of transecting this continental shelf, and creates these really like key areas where this cold, nutrient-rich water at the bottom is flowing upwards into more shallow water, and feeding phytoplankton and zooplankton and small fish going into bigger fish, and then of course up to our apex predators, the killer whales. So yeah, the canyon system there, working along with 3 different currents that are really kind of playing a huge part in that, and moving all of that nutrient-rich water up and attracting the prey for our killer whales down here in Bremer Bay.
Well, and there's a lot out there. It's not just killer whales.
Yeah.
Pilot whales, false killer whales, sperm whales, lots of different fish species, sharks.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty biodiverse. Dolphins, A lot of diversity in animals out there.
Yeah, I think just in the first, week that you guys have been out on the water here, we've seen, pilot whales, false killer whales.
Common dolphins, pretty much every day.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Fairy penguins.
And the Australian sea lions, including a brand new pup out there.
And all the albatrosses.
Yes.
Those have been great.
Incredible. Different species of albatross, shearwaters.
Petrels.
Storm petrels, yeah. Just a really cool area. It is some big water out there.
Yeah.
It's not like the inland waters of Washington State and British Columbia that we're used to. Out here, like the glassy day out here is like our days that are borderline for us even going out at home.
There are glassy days down here. I've had a couple, but it's really interesting because back home, and you both know this, those glassy days are the ones we long for because it's like easy, right, to be out on the water, but we still have just as good a chance of finding killer whales as any other day, maybe even better because we can see further. And out here, those calm, glassy days, it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to find the whales, and we've been lucky this time, even with our kind of calmer days, we've found the whales really quickly every single day. But there's days where they don't find them when it's calm or when it takes hours to find them.
That's what I've heard from the crew down here, not just this time, but also the last time I was down here, is they don't like the calm days because you're less likely to find the killer whales in the canyons. I'm not sure exactly why that is. Are there any theories what might be behind that?
There's probably a lot of theories, and everything I say is just like anecdotal to what I've learned from the crew. And huge shout out to Natural East Charters. We'll talk about them throughout the episode, but their crew down here is just amazing. They've been out here the longest and know a ton about what's going on out there in the canyons, about all the different species, the whales themselves. So they really have an amazing crew out here teaching people about not just the whales, but the area itself. So, their observations, as well as my own over the 4 times I've been here now, I really do think because these whales are primarily feeding on beaked whales, and when those calm days are happening, they're much easier to hear. Like those beaked whales can hear the killer whales, and so it's harder to be, sneaking up on your prey. So I think that potentially is what's happening on those calmer days. It's a lot harder to be inconspicuous.
Well, and that's what I've heard from the crew, is that the killer whales want that louder sound of the current and the waves to mask their own sound profile so that they can use some stealth when they're looking for beaked whales.
And as we've seen, it looks like a lot of fun to be riding those swells too.
Yeah, and we will get to that in a second.
For the whales.
For the whales, yeah. Definitely not as much fun for us, but definitely for the whales. And I just want to put a highlight on, they are feeding mostly on beaked whales, but they do have a really diverse diet here. Possibly one of the more diverse diets in terms of killer whales on Earth, because we have seen several predations of beaked whales so far just in a week, but we did see one day they were pounding on tuna. Yeah.
And I think last time you were here, Jeff, not that they're feeding on the mola, the sunfish, but you saw one get a big bite taken out of it. And they do kind of harass them a bit out here. We've seen it on several different occasions. So, they're pretty diverse. And I know we talked about this population, I think in episode 11. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Whales of the World, episode 11. But just to kind of give a background about these guys, because we're kind of jumping into it. This population of killer whales was found, relatively recently. They've been out there a lot longer, of course. They've, who knows how long. But as a scientific community and a tourism community, we've really only known about these whales for about 20 or so years. Early 2000s was kind of when they were found out there. And tourism started, about 12 years ago or so. 2013, I think, was their first year going out to the canyon, specifically looking for the orcas.
And it's Natural East Charters that
Yeah,
that
they were the
started-
ones that started.
They're the ones that started the whale watching out here, and really
Yeah, and really in the Southwest as well.
Yeah, and really got into starting to ID and put together ID catalogs and figure out who these whales are and what they're eating and very, very scientific based and respectful whale watching.
Yeah, it's really, really great being out with them. So these killer whales live, or at least occupy, these waters kind of out on the continental shelf and into the canyon system. And we typically see them kind of right around the 1,000-meter mark. That's where they tend to patrol. And like you said, Jeff, they're eating a variety of things, but primarily, we think primarily beaked whales.
They have been documented to take blue whales.
Yep.
Twice. At least it was documented. And documented, I think there was an attack on a humpback.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So very, very diverse diet.
Yeah, very different than ours back home, where one population is eating specifically mammals and one type is eating almost specifically one type of fish. These guys are less specialized, I guess, in a way. They're more generalist, which works out for them, I think. In any species, the more specialized you get,
they're also very robust.
The more you
These
can
are
be affected.
Big whales. And I wanted April to jump in here because one of the cool things that we're getting to see, Sarah was fourth time, my second time, but this is brand new for April, and we're kind of watching first impressions, reliving first impressions through April, and would love to hear what's going through your mind this past week when this is all brand new and not sure what you were expecting and what you're thinking with seeing these whales and what's standing out for you.
Yeah, first we would never take the J-boats out on most of these days. Not calling that one. Not going out. But the number of times we keep seeing whales, we're 100%, which from here on out, it's just all bonus. It's just all gravy. It's amazing. And we're going to one specific spot on the map to start the search, and they found them every single day.
Every day.
Within less than half an hour, every single day.
The longest day, so we've been out for, I think, 8 days so far, and the longest was 30 minutes that it took. But we were just stopped in one spot and we were scanning, and it took 30 minutes to find them. But several of the 8 days, it's been less than 5 minutes, and they refer to this as the hot spot.
Yeah.
And and we've talked about this when we're up at in the wheelhouse and looking at the GPS tracks of the boat, and you've got this just
it's just a solid, thick rectangle.
Yeah.
It's been filled in by the tracks, never being erased, over and over and over. That's where you go.
Yeah.
We don't do that at home. So that's crazy. And then to see them spread so much. There are all of these different groups, and 1 minute we're with members of one group, and 10 or 20 minutes later, there's another group. And it's not always the entire group, but it's so fascinating to see that, within 5 or 10 minutes, you've been looking at a specific group, and now, it's another group. And then, I don't know, it's just amazing.
That's a really cool observation that I think I've been taking for granted. I haven't really thought about that. Because at home, when we're watching a group of whales, it's like, oh, okay, they're down on a dive for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then they come up, and we go to where they are, and it's the same group. But here, you can watch a group, and you're with them for half an hour, and then they go on one of their 5 or 6 minute dives, and the one key difference, the whales down here are very zigzaggy. Like we think ours are, and they're not. These whales will do long dives. They'll go down 5, 8 minutes, and they come up, and sometimes they're right where you left them. Other times they're a half a mile away. And so on some of these long dives, they come up and they're like, oh, half a mile at 2:00, and you go out, and they're completely different whales than you've been watching. It's like, oh, this is so-and-so's group. Over the course of doing this, you can end up seeing 20 or 30 different whales in different groups. And that's a great observation because it's so different from what we get at home.
And I get this question a lot here and actually back home is like, what are the big differences you're seeing? And that's one of the things I talk about is like back home, when we're with a group of whales, we don't necessarily expect that there's going to be another group of whales within their earshot, right? And here it is like we could be with a group of whales and never see other whales until the hunt is on, and then suddenly you're looking out and seeing whales surging in from all around you,
all over,
that were obviously not that far off, but we never saw them.
Well, yeah. And it's interesting, like at home, if there is another group of whales nearby, they're going to come more often than not. They come and everybody gets excited and they're getting together. And here it's like, oh yeah, that group's over there, that group's over there. They're
patrolling until it's time to eat.
Yeah.
And then when that dinner bell rings,
everyone come in.
Insane.
It is. Yeah. It is. And we're going to talk about some stories about some of the predations we've seen and what it's like here and how different it is. But one of the other differences, and April, you've been talking a lot about this on the boat this week. The whales that we see at home, the studies and ID catalogs go back to the 1970s, some earlier. And we don't have that kind of history here. So a lot of the whales, especially the adult whales here, like we don't know how these different groups are related, if they're related. I mean, they're obviously same population, but we don't know if we're dealing with a large pod with multiple match lines. We don't know a lot of their relationships with each other, even within a group. We don't have that same matrilineal definitiveness that we have with our groups at home, which makes it interesting.
I think that's what makes it really cool too. Like, we're so used to having a population that we know so much about, that basically the foundation of like what we as like a whole whale community know about killer whales is kind of originated from the population's northern residents, southern residents, and our big killer whales back home. And now that we're kind of branching out and like looking at Norwegian killer whales and Icelandic killer whales and killer whales in South Africa and around the globe, we're kind of having to like branch out from that original box that we created of knowledge about killer whales. And these guys are just continuing to expand beyond what we thought we knew.
Yeah, that's one thing that, I'm realizing I've got to throw it all out the window, because that's such a human trait. We want to put everything in a box, label it, and that's what it is. There's not the history here to say, oh yeah, this is that matriline, this is the other matriline. So they get called groups for now and how are you going to pick up poop samples out in that water?
This is not really conducive for I mean, you'll lose the poop sniffing dog you'll lose it over the bow.
You'll lose the person who's trying to collect the poop too.
Yeah. I mean, it is really interesting, like just even the culture. One of the things that I've noticed, I don't think I really picked this up the first time I was here, this will be my second time first impression, is we're seeing a lot of adult males. But like different groups, you're not seeing groups that have a lot of adult males in those groups. It seems like each group has one, maybe two. And it's interesting. I think there's a question in my mind, is there a cultural difference with adult males and how they fit into the social construct of this culture?
I don't think you can make that leap yet. You can't rule one out and say it's the other, because we have seen it on 2 different days where 2 males from different groups were together in the mix, right. And which is beautiful to see.
It's incredible, cool. But it's a question, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are the it's too early to know on some of these things. Like, what are the cultural differences between the whales that we're more familiar with and these whales?
Yeah, and is it a reflection on the health of the population? Is it a reflection on anything? We don't know.
And this does seem like a very healthy population. I think, Sarah, you mentioned there are thought to be around 300 in this unique population. However, I'd love for you to talk about this. There was a new calf that was like 5 months old, but first documented this week. And something that's so like would never happen with the whales that we see every day, but something that does happen, I think, season over season. We got to see some new whales in this population that have never been documented this week.
Yeah. Yep. So January 4th, we were out in the water, and I mean, first off, found the new calf, and that was amazing. Probably about 5 to 6 months old, so not like fresh, but definitely one that was not seen last season. And with those whales were some ones that I had never seen before. And Machi, who's also been out here for 7 years and knows these whales like the back of her hand, wasn't on board that day. But we saw these two females that popped up next to the boat, and they were just whales that obviously I had never. One had a very obvious notch in her fin, and then the other had an open saddle. And I was like, well, I definitely would have remembered seeing an adult female with an open saddle, or any open saddle in this population. It was just nothing I had ever seen before.
That's really interesting, the open saddle.
Mm-hmm. And then we saw the calf again, and luckily you guys were on board that day. It was just a few days later. And those whales were, again, right with this other group that we know, Nani's group or Alki's group, depending on who you call it after. And there were 4 new whales, so an adult male, and we believe 3 females or juvenile males. One potentially a juvenile male. We can't tell, though. And very, very interesting whales. But yeah, brand new adult whales in the population, never, to our knowledge, been documented before.
And it's so fascinating. And I do want April looked like she wanted to jump in here, and I want her to talk, but I also want to make sure that we back up a little bit and explain the open and closed saddle and why it's really interesting to see an open saddle on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump to, is how can you only have, you've got a brand new individual, she's got an open saddle patch. There are no others that have been documented?
Not in this population, I don't think. I think it's
Sarah.
Southern residents, northern residents. I think Japan, the Russian and Japan killer whales.
Yeah, I mean, open saddles we see throughout different ecotypes. So in Antarctica, I believe there's whales that have been seen with open saddle patches, and there's some thought that potentially the Bremer orcas came from an Antarctic population. So it's not far-fetched that there would be open saddles, and but definitely we see some huge saddles that look very, very reminiscent of the big killer whales back home. These huge, large, gray, closed saddle patches. But there's also, just like some of the younger whales that we're seeing back home, and some of the adult whales we're seeing in that big population back home, they have almost that shadow. Kind of looks like an open saddle, but these were not just shadows. These were definitely open.
And we'll post some photos in the show notes.
Yeah, to my knowledge, they've never been documented before in this population, but my knowledge is quite limited on this. So there could be other whales out there that have been seen with open saddles. There's a few females that have that kind of like faint shadow that look open in the population. But yeah, and funnily enough, it's in the group that these whales were associating with. So
the other thing I'll add, and this will be the last part of my first impressions, and April and I have been talking a lot about this on the boat when we're seeing them. They have really cool dorsal fin shapes and different styles of notches and nicks in their dorsal and their eye patches.
I love their eye patches.
Coolest I've ever
different
seen.
Shapes there are a couple that are kind of almost what I would say generic, just a kind of a comet shape, but so many of them, they have these jagged edges at the leading edge, and it looks like you're supposed to plug it into something.
Yeah.
Or it's shaped like a bird. Yeah.
Yeah, there's one that looks to me like a rubber ducky. But my favorite, there is an eye patch, and I can't remember who it is, but it's a bowling pin.
Oh yeah, that's Smudge.
Yeah. I mean, that is the coolest eye patch I've ever seen.
It is cool, but it's just on the one side.
Yeah.
The other side is, but these are wicked cool eye patches.
And dorsal fins. The notches and nicks that they have in their dorsals are
and they're
really
robust.
Yeah.
I love that word.
Well, they are round. They're these are whales that are filled out.
Yeah.
The way I've been describing it too, because of what we've seen in the hunting, and we should start talking about, I'd like to talk about some of the stories of things that we are seeing and experiencing. But to me, these killer whales are the apex of apex predators.
Yeah, when you've got a group of whales that have no problem harassing with the intent of taking down a humpback and can actually take down blue whales and take food away from sperm whales.
Yeah.
Does it get any better?
Yeah. And we have seen, multiple predations this week. We've seen a lot of days where it's just very slow travel, And we have seen some play, and like we said, the water is big. One of the cool things that we've seen that is also different from the whales that we see at home, we see a lot of surfing here.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The water's so blue and clear, and you see them coming up and over the wave, and then they just race down into the trough, in front of the boat, under the boat, whatever, and line up to do it again practically.
Right. It's like they're going back to the top of the hill.
Yeah.
But sometimes they'll stop at the boat and turn on their side and stop and just look up, interact or curious. Sometimes the crew puts in a GoPro in the water, and it's almost like the whales are posing for photos.
Yeah, they're super curious for sure. We, see that year to year, and a lot of times it's the younger animals, but it's the adult animals as well. The adult whales will come over and roll over and look at the boat or at the people on the boat. For those of you that have been out, on the boat with me, I do say this quite a bit back home is, when a deer sees you driving in a car, they just think of the car as the creature. They don't realize that there's a person inside the car. And when a whale looks at you on a boat, I think that they know that there are people on a boat. Like the boat is the object and there are people on it.
I mean, there's no question when you're seeing it out there, and the water's really clear out here, blue and clear and great visibility, and you can see them turn on their side right by the hull of the boat, and they're looking up at people.
I think what Sarah needs to do next is start recording what days Machi is out there and how many times they line up at the back of the boat for their
yearbook
shots,
photo.
Right? Yeah, because I would love to know if there's any correlation. She's been out here for 7 years. Do they recognize her? And they recognize that big stick with the little box on it.
Right. It's fascinating. If you want to see some of these, follow Naturalist Charters on Instagram and Facebook, and we'll post links to their social media and to their website. They post incredible stuff from down here. It really is just amazing. And they do such a great job. We talk about this on our boats a lot. The whales are always in charge of every encounter, and you have that feel with Naturalist Charters as well. They're very respectful of the whales, and the whales dictate what we do when we're watching.
Right. And I think for a lot of people that have followed what's going on down here in the Bremer Canyon, a lot of the things that stick out to them are these curious whales that are, potentially interacting with the boat. And just to be very, very clear, you can't force an interaction with a wild killer whale. So Naturalist Charters is amazing. They're highly, highly ethical, very, very skilled and knowledgeable. And we wouldn't be out there if they weren't. But definitely they approach respectfully. And if the whales want to engage and they want to be curious about the boat, then they're the ones that are coming to the boat.
I want to get into some of the predations and some of the behaviors that we're seeing with that. But before we do, Sarah, any first impressions of your fourth time, your first impressions that stand out to you that you maybe knew that you didn't have your previous 3 times down here?
I don't know that there's any one standout encounter. I just think that for me, after being down here quite a bit for myself, that any encounter, any time I'm out on the water and get to go out to the canyon and see these whales, I'm learning something from them. Even if it's just observing who they're with that day, what individuals are present, how they're interacting with each other, how they're interacting with the environment that they're in. If I'm open to it, I'm learning something, and that's just really cool as it kind of deepens this foundation of knowledge that we all have, because that's how it should be. We should all be sharing kind of this information and data and what we're seeing and learning about these whales, because it's going to benefit us, and it's also going to benefit the whales and protecting them in this ecosystem that they're relying on. And not just the killer whales, but the beaked whales, the sperm whales, pilot whales, et cetera, fish and everything. So, no one thing, but just everything.
Right. And it's part of the discovery and study and sharing information and whale watching around these whales that has given them a protected area down here with those canyons. And I think it's relatively newly protected, but the protection is really based on preventing resource extraction.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And oil exploration, which...
So it's believed that there's some underwater oil and gas deposits deep under the seafloor. So there's some potential leaks of methane and that kind of thing that's creating this really abundant life down very, very deep in these canyons. And then this, kind of cold nutrient water is coming through and pulling up those nutrients and feeding the upper layers of the water.
And it is you have to. There are two permitted whale watching companies to go out there, and if you don't have a commercial whale watch permit, you can go out there, but you can't stop to view whales. And I mean, you've got to be brave if you have a small recreational boat. And we did see one out there, and it's like, whoa, how did this dude get out there?
It was a calmer day, but it was not calm.
Right, and he's on there like his 26-foot single outboard,
at
and it's
most.
It's like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Nothing I would ever like take a small
single
boat
motor.
No. I want to talk about some of the cool stuff that we've seen.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that stands out in your in the context of what you were just saying, one of the things I think that killer whales are always teaching us is patience.
Definitely.
You get what you get with them. You also know that if you wait long enough and they allow you to hang long enough, you're going to get something special. You never know exactly what that is. But we've had some days out here where they're doing 5 to 9 minute dives. They're very zigzaggy. Sometimes they come up, they're over half a mile away. Sometimes they come up, they're 100 yards away, and just constantly doubling back, changing directions. You just never really know. And one of the interesting things is when they do go down, like, you just stop the boat. You don't go anywhere because you don't know if they're going to double back and come up close, or they're coming up half a mile away.
Which is so different from how we're used to it.
Right. We like maintain course and speed.
Mm-hmm.
And here it is like, you just have no idea. But then you ride that out, and then on the predations that we've seen, it's like, bam.
It's like a light switch.
It is. It changes on a dime.
Yeah, they hear their prey coming up, I'm imagining, and it's on. It's just on. But the other difference here is we're looking at a big, wide open ocean, right?
Right.
We're out in the open ocean. We're not in these small channels and straits that we can pretty much guess, they're headed in this direction. So, we're going to keep going in that direction.
Right. Here it's I mean, you have the
water.
canyons underwater, but like there's no, it's like you said, they're not in a channel or between islands. I mean, they can go in any direction. But when things change on a dime, and I think you mentioned this, April, that it's probably that they're hearing, so assuming they're going after beaked whales, which some species can hold their breath for 4 hours, and they may be hearing them on their way to the surface to get a breath from who knows how far away, miles. Mm-hmm. And it's on. They start what we would call this at home with our whales. We would say, they're porpoising, but it's not. Here they call it surging.
Not descriptive enough for here.
It's not, because it's, and it really is different, even though there's some similarities to what we see with porpoising whales. Here they call it surging.
Well, I think this is a good time to get into the surge of 2 days ago.
The surge. This was one of the most incredible whale watching experience I've ever had. It was a rough day. Yeah. It was big swells. I don't know what, 3 meters, 2.5, 3 meters.
I would say 2 meters with some chop on top.
And a pretty stiff breeze.
Yeah. Bad day to forget my coat.
And you forgot your coat. And we were just tracking we had bounced around a few different groups throughout the day, just to slow travel, long dives, sometimes going upwind into the waves, sometimes going downwind with the waves. Yeah,
we got some cool interactions too. Honestly, the right kind of very soon before the surge started, the whales were making some close passes to the boat. There was, a couple spy hops. They were generally kind of like in this social mood.
Yeah, there were some swimming like pretty close to the hull and stopping and turning on their side and looking up. Then the surge started.
I went down to write on my data sheet, and then I felt the motors rev up.
Yeah, and so what you've got here, now we can see different groups. Like this is the first time all day where it's like, okay, we can see the different groups that we've been with, and they're spread out, but they're in groups, and they are traveling at high speed, 20 knots.
Yeah, we were doing over 20 knots for, I think the chase was 5 miles.
Yeah, and they were chasing a beaked whale and basically chased it up onto the continental shelf, which is still deep water.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting because usually we're in, about 1,000 meters or deeper. We don't usually get up onto the shelf. But while we were with them before the surge had started, sorry to interrupt, Jeff, they kind of took this track up towards the shelf, which is not something we see very often. They were in 1,000 meters of water, and then they were in like 700 meters of water, and we were kind of like, oh, what's going on here? And then they were in like 500 meters of water, and then they were in 400 meters of water, and that's when the surge started. I think they were following something. Interesting that this beaked whale kind of like went up onto the shelf.
Yeah,
maybe in an attempt to get away from them. I don't know, but
probably not the best idea.
No.
And then so we're now going into the waves. They are they are so graceful and so powerful, and we're going to post photos. We've also, April, Sarah, and I have also been posting on our Facebook and Instagram pages of photos from this day, from the surge, because it was just incredible to see their power. And because,
like Sarah said, over 20 knots they're moving.
Yeah. And like we're editing photos, and we keep talking about the patterns of the water that's coming off the whales as they're plowing into the waves. But plowing is really not, they're graceful and powerful. We're not plowing, we're pounding.
Yeah, we were pounding into the waves. You ended up outside.
April and I, Sarah was downstairs. April and I were in the wheelhouse, and I saw there was one group ahead of us that was surging like in this big group, and I wanted to get a photo of them, but it was really tough because all you could see were blows coming from below the swell ahead of us. But then there were a few females and juveniles and a big male that were actually working their way in towards the boat as they were surging, and they were behind us, and they were coming up, gaining speed on us. And I wanted to see if I could get some photos. So I went outside, which worked out for photos. I'll say that it worked out from that aspect.
So what happened to you while you were down on the first level deck, Sarah? What was your observation?
Well, I came out of the cabin because I'd been recording data, and I was gonna head upstairs, and I felt the bow lift up as we went into this swell, and then start its very fast descent. And I was like, I'm gonna wait. And then all this water just came over the top of the boat and down through the stairwell. So, great call on my part not to go upstairs at that moment. And Jeff, how was that on the top deck for you?
So you only saw half the water that actually worked its way down the stairwell, because the other half of the water was
all over Jeff.
It ended up pouring down onto my head, along my sweatshirt, and a very large amount all over my jeans.
Your jeans were soaked.
And while this water came very quickly all at once, there was a little standing water around where I was standing. But thank God for the water that I was wearing my running shoes that day that were very good at absorbing the water, and I had some cotton socks to soak up some of that.
Moisturized, hydrated.
I was, and I ended up in just totally soaked for the next 4 to 5 hours until we got back. I mean, there's nothing you can do.
No, but your photos were worth it.
The photos were worth it, and
until we got back and you found your dry pants in your bag.
Yeah, I didn't realize that when we got back and I was looking for a dry pair of pants, and I was like, oh my God, they're in my backpack. I had them the whole time. But the photos were worth it, and just even taking it in for miles. And we're pounding into these waves, and the whales are just flying.
And the little kiddos I posted a couple, but the youngsters, they're just leaping. It looks like these beautiful dolphin leaps, so graceful. And yeah, we are pounding into the waves. And like Sarah said, you'd feel a little bit of a concussion, and then the bow would lift up and drop down. And
two,
how fun.
Oh, it's incredible. And two really cool things from seeing this. One is, as I mentioned earlier, the water clarity is really cool. So we had a male in his late teens. His name is Nibbles. He was the one who came in closest to the boat. It was almost like he was using the boat to help him gain some speed, like he was in the slipstream. And so you could see, being upstairs, you could see him flying underwater, and you knew when he was coming up. If you could maintain your balance, and depending what the boat was doing, where it was in the swell, you could get some good shots.
It's kind of hard to keep a hand for the boat when you've got a big ass camera in your hands and you're trying to shoot photos or even video. Yeah.
Exactly. But it was so cool to see him. I mean, you could see before he was coming up, you could see his exhale and all the bubbles coming in this bubble trail before he broke the surface.
Yeah, you'll have to check out some of Jeff's photos. There are these circular patterns of the water flying off of his skin and his dorsal fin. It's just cool.
And it's easy to overlook stuff like that, but when you stop and look at it, and it's like, this is a result of them blasting through the water and the power that they have. It is remarkable. Eventually, the group that was up ahead, and I never got a good picture of them. The only thing I got were blows that were on the other side of the swell, so you couldn't even see them.
Yeah, it was a lot of the females.
Yeah. Well, they were the ones that were first on scene with the beaked whale, and we knew something was going on. And you two were, at this point, I was soaked. I was starting to get really cold, and I knew I got a bunch of shots, so my attention was fading a little bit, but I knew something had changed because the big group up ahead had stopped, and they were now facing back towards the boat. And so we slowed, and so the boat slowed, so we don't have water coming at us. And then you two jumped outside, and you guys were dialed in on what happened next.
Oh, we were outside. You had just shielded us from most of the water at that point. So
thank you for your.
I'm here to help.
Thank you. We were with Nibbles and some of the kids that were behind. And April, you were further up towards the bow than I was, so you might have had some better views than I did. But the females finished that beaked whale off before we got there. It was right before we got there, but it was over very, very quickly. So we got there, and the whales were had a huge oil slick and big blood bubbles coming up, and
huge oil slick.
They made quick work of what we think was probably a Gray's beaked whale.
So one of the crew, or several of them, were telling me that they think, or they've observed, that those killer whales go in for the jugular, and it creates this opportunity for them to get the whale to bleed out much more quickly, and it dies faster.
I haven't seen the kill often enough to say anything about their strategy, right?
Well, I'll just jump in on this quickly. Is one of the things that they have said to us, that the crew at Natural East Charters has said to us, is a lot of these predations happen because these are such deep, the beaked whales are such deep water whales, that a lot of these predations happen pretty deep, and they know they know there's a predation that happened because they see this big slick and all the birds come in and they can see prey sharing, but it's pretty rare that they actually see the whale before it's
very, very rare.
And we've had that twice this week, including this time, and we didn't see like the entire whale like we did on the first predation we'll talk about, but we did see more. Like, we knew it was a beaked whale. We did see the beak. And the reason I was bringing this up is I like that theory because in both predations where we did see the animal, graphic, but both of those times there was a lot of blood in the water, like very different from what we see. We don't see a lot of blood in the water, and we do see the animal almost every time there's a predation at home. Here, I think when you do see it, like, there's a lot of blood in the water that you see.
Yeah, but I think like part of that is the clarity of the water. Like, we don't see the blood because the water is so murky where we are. It's dark. And like, unless it's right at the moment of the kill, like we've seen twice, where it's bright red and it's up at the surface, like it diffuses pretty quickly. And if you don't know what you're looking at, you're not gonna know that it's blood, because it looks kind of yellow, like brown. So I don't know, but yeah, I mean, who knows? I haven't observed the moment of the kill enough to say like what they're going for, like where, if there's a specific part of the body that they're aiming for or what. Like there's going to be a lot of blood regardless of where you tear into a beaked whale, that killing blow wherever it may be.
At this point, I'm kind of watching. I wasn't taking photos as much, but in addition to the oil slick and the blood, what else did you guys see?
Well, pretty much all of the internal organs, the rib cage. It was interesting. Is it Akama, one of the females? So she ended up basically on top of that rib cage with the inflated lungs.
Those were big lungs.
Oh yeah,
and they were inflated, so they were at the surface.
Well, for a creature that dives 4,000 feet, you got to have some big lungs to get down there and back.
4 hours.
Yeah, crazy. And it appeared like she was holding that because the shearwaters and the albatross had landed on some other stuff, which I'll get to. But she ended up with the lungs and that carcass. So I think she was holding that for kiddos and other group members underneath, and they were feeding. And you could, again, that clarity of water, you could see the white from the other killer whales under her.
Yeah.
It was wicked.
Incredible.
And then she finally pushed it down, and shortly after, bubble blast.
Yeah.
Popped the lungs.
That's what I'm thinking too. Is
kind of like those packing bubbles. You love to pop them.
Right.
Don't
or who
waste
doesn't
them.
like it? Right. If you got balloons, you got to pop them. Obviously, this is our interpretation, but it really did feel like I watched her pull down the lungs, and then they came back up, and she pulled them down again, and then you saw this huge blast of bubbles, and I was like, oh, they popped the lungs.
Yeah. It was very interesting to watch all of that take place. It's also really interesting when you can see evidence of them underwater, because you rarely see that in the Salish Sea.
Yeah, it's really, it's very cool to see.
Yeah.
You definitely
and then
see
over by
more.
the albatross, I think it was a shy albatross, there was another big hunk of red. And so I started focusing on that. And when I looked at the photos later, I'm asking people, is this a brain? No. Sarah, is this a brain? I made Sarah come over and look. But what was the consensus?
Well, I think it was Kyle on the roof that had the best view. But it definitely, was the head of the beaked whale, and likely the brain. It looked like a brain to me.
Yeah, April got the brain shot, and I think Jenna at Natural East Charters, who said that as far as she knows, nobody's ever gotten a brain shot before.
Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
I mean, they do like to carry the head around. I have seen that on multiple occasions, but I've never seen a brain.
Well, and speaking of that, we did see that on a predation earlier in the week, where we saw one of the juveniles.
And on this one too.
And
after,
on this one,
after that, they did grab it and
and kind of paraded around and lifted out of the water. Yeah, pretty incredible, and it's sometimes hard to find words to describe these whales, and it's like I said, they're the apex of apex predators.
Yeah,
we were out there one day.
I think it was your second day on the water
with where they lifted it out. Yeah, with that one. And then there was, I think the following day we saw somewhere between 40 and 50 orcas, and we had 4 rapid fire predations. And on those predations, we couldn't see
see anything.
We didn't see anything of what they were taking, but you could see the oil slick after a big surge.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were prey sharing for a little bit, and then they'd surged again, and it was like 4 consecutive predations.
Yeah, and different groups of whales with each one. It was,
Yeah. And then we did see them one day. I think the only day that we didn't have a predation, we saw them fishing on juvenile bluefin tuna, which is very different behavior. That behavior reminded me more of watching the southern residents when they're fishing, and the whales were all in like 1s and 2s doing long dives, different directions. But at one point, April, I pointed this out to you, that there was a huge group of juvenile bluefin tuna breaking the surface.
Yeah, they were really small, and they were really fast. So nobody got a shot of them. But yeah, I'd say they were just getting out of Dodge. It was not a good place to be for them.
Yeah, just really neat. And such a difference. The last time I was here, I mean, I only went out on the water 3 times, but I didn't see any predation the last time I was here.
Well, by the second day when we had the first predation that we saw where they're, holding the head up, it's like, I'm spoiled now.
Right. It's like everything else is like, what else are we going to get? Because it's really incredible to have this many visible predations in such a short period of time. And we're here for the rest of the month, so who knows what else. We're definitely going to do more episodes talking about this. Hopefully we're going to possibly get somebody from Natural East Charters to join us on an episode and talk about what we're seeing out there and share more information about these whales. And
is there anything you would want to see? Like if you could see...
Well, one of the things that I saw last time I was here, and they talk about how it's kind of rare to see, but it does happen, are really like surface active social whales.
Yeah, it is pretty rare.
Yeah, but I would like to see that because you had that your first time out, and but it's really special to see because they are.
I want it too.
Yeah, and they're. In that regard, they're similar to what we see at home when the whales that we see are very social and surface active. These are very similar in that way, and it gets to show a different side of them than the apex of apex predator, right? Like it's like you get to see their soft side and their emotional side, and I'd like to see that firsthand again. Other than that, this week I got to see my first ever false killer whales. Got to see my first ever longfin pilot whales, but that was so brief because we were following a group of killer whales on a surge and we passed by a group of pilot whales and it's like, oh, there are pilot whales over there, but we got to go.
Yeah, get a good look because we're not staying.
And they are so freaking cool looking. I would love to have another encounter and an extended encounter to see pilot whales.
Sarah, are you getting all of this, our requests? Because I'd like to see a sperm whale.
Yeah, I'd like to see that too. Sarah, what's on your list? What do you want to see?
I'd like to see anything with a working camera.
Well, you're getting a new camera on Wednesday. Sarah has been having camera issues. But I also want to point out and ask you about this, Sarah. April and I are both here just kind of as tag-alongs and a learning opportunity for us to be able to share information and stories about a different population of killer whales when we're on our tours at home with our guests. I think the more we learn about other whale populations, the better we can communicate about the whales that we're seeing and about whales in general. But you're here doing some research as well. So would love for you to talk about what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I'm an expert by no means.
All means.
Nope. But yeah, it's my second season
Sarah's
down
very
here.
Modest and shy, but she is an expert.
I'm not. I'm absolutely not. But anyway, down here through Orca Behavior Institute, and grateful to Natural East Charters who has allowed me to come out with them for 2 seasons now, collecting some behavioral data on this population. And the methodology we're using is one that we use with the southern residents, with the bigs back home. Monica has used it with the northern residents as well. So it's great to be able to do this with different population of killer whales, and it's something we can use to compare the two populations or different populations, and then also look at the same population over time. As more time is done, more observations are made, and it's pretty basic. The things that I'm recording, how tight are the whales swimming to each other? Are they directional? Are they non-directional? How fast are they going? Any other behaviors that we're noting? Just trying to create kind of these snapshots of what's happening so we can kind of compare, as things change, whether it's looking at other populations and comparing the two, or looking at how their behaviors change as prey availability maybe shifts as climates change, as any other potential factors that are shifting.
It must be interesting taking this data compared with taking the same kind of data back in the Pacific Northwest with the populations that we see. I mean, you must notice some very stark differences in what you're recording.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to like kind of analyze this year and look at the difference between last year's and this year's, because I think there will be some differences in looking at how it compares to the bigs and the southern residents. But I think in general, like, they're less surface active. We see fewer surface behaviors like breaching and spy hopping and tail slapping and that kind of thing, which is really, to me, and anecdotal at best, but just my theory is that because they're pursuing these large, intelligent beaked whales, they have to be as inconspicuous as possible. And especially when they're having to travel in potentially larger groups to take down a larger prey item, until that meal is secured, they're, being pretty inconspicuous. So that's one of the big differences.
Yeah, until the surge.
Until the surge.
And then
game on.
Game on. You're also here. You were interviewed for an article by Australian ABC News as an expert.
Not an expert.
And we'll post a link to the article.
Yeah, really cool. Just a little quick interview with ABC Australia, just talking about what we're seeing out there. So it was amazing to me that we even got 5G out at the hotspot. Impressive all the way around. But just how these whales are looking, what we've been seeing for the first week of the season, and what we're expecting with the population. How's it looking? Are the calves? Are there calves? Are they coming back? It's looking like a pretty healthy population overall. They're, as you said, pretty beefy whales.
Definitely beefy whales.
So that's good. Where there's prey available, the population, is healthy. Calves survive, and that's why we need to continue that.
I don't think this is getting picked up by the mics, but we have a raven outside.
Yeah, I was a little distracted.
Yeah, one of the cool things about being here too, the birds down here are not just off on the canyons with the albatross and the
Wattle
petrels,
birds.
but the birds on shore are incredible, and even ravens. If that didn't show up, I'm going to post an audio recording in the show notes.
Yeah.
The ravens here sound very different than the ravens that we have at home.
They sound much more like they're actually trying to talk to us.
Yeah,
and it sounds like we're in a lot of trouble.
Exactly. They're definitely complaining.
Uh-oh.
So I'll definitely post an audio recording because it's pretty entertaining. You can't hear them without laughing. But great birding down here, and it is a long trek to get here, and a long trek even offshore just to get to the whales. But if you're interested in ever coming down here, the season runs December through April here, and then Natural East Charters runs other tours during the rest of the year, mostly with humpbacks and some blues
they're
from other
great
locations.
Crew. Great company, great crew, really knowledgeable.
Yeah, excellent.
With biologists and photographers. It's excellent crew.
We are gonna kind of at our time now, but we are gonna do another episode because who knows what else we're gonna see out here, and we want to share more information about this really unique, special, and awe-inspiring population of killer whales. Who knows what else we're going to see and what other encounters we're going to have. If you are enjoying these episodes, we'd love it. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, leave us a review. If you have any questions or comments or topic suggestions, you can email us at afterthebreachpodcast@gmail.com. Visit our website, afterthebreachpodcast.com.
You mentioned we'll be doing more of these episodes before we head back home for our season. But yeah, if you guys are interested, if you have any questions about what we're seeing down here, about specific whales or anything we've covered, definitely let us know. And we do have some upcoming trips going on. We have our photo workshop in August that has a few seats left available. We have a really exciting humpback trip to the Dominican Republic, the Silver Bank, which we've talked about on previous episodes. That will be in 2025.
February of 2025.
And I think we have 1 or 2 seats left. So if you're interested at all, reach out. We'd love to have you on board. And if it doesn't work out this time, well,
we will likely be doing that again. And if you're coming out or want to come out with us on the water this season to see killer whales and or humpback whales in the Salish Sea, we'll be running, starting March, we'll be running daily through and into November. We'll have half-day tours and some all-day tours as we get into the fall. And with Maya's Legacy Whale Watching out of Friday Harbor, if you're coming out with us, make sure you let us know that you listen to the podcast.
We'd love to meet you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will talk soon. And in the meantime,
stay safe out there.